Hey everyone, welcome to Fantasy Footy Fan, Jeff here. Can you believe that we will have match sims between clubs in just under 2 weeks and preseason games in 3 weeks? It's time to get excited, everyone. It's going to be a busy time for research during that period, but there's been a lot happening in the last few weeks too. We've had training reports, intra-club match sims, role changes, even rule changes. The biggest impact for Supercoach from the rule changes for the 2024 season is that previously the sub was taken from the emergencies when teams were announced. Now teams will name 5 players on the extended bench and the sub will be named 1 hour before the start of the game. And the sub doesn't even have to come from the extended bench either. It can be chosen from any player named in the team. So we'll need to keep a close eye on all teams on game day for that sub. Can you believe that? Thanks AFL. Why couldn't they just have 5 on the interchange? Simple. Anyway, in this video, I'll be discussing 3 things. Firstly, I'll share my favorite stat for each player in my team, the main reason why I've selected them. Second, I'll discuss the changes I made from my first team, my January team. And third, I'll share a brief stat on each premium player and value pick I think we should be considering for our sides. Now, there are some players I've cooled off on and some I've added since my last video, the previous version of this one. So let's get into it. Let's get started. So I've got Nick Dacos lined up here. I'm starting with him, and it's interesting listening to the conversation around Dacos. A lot are saying that we shouldn't start him because of potential tags he may receive, and then he has the early bye. But this is how I'm approaching it. He's playing exclusively in the midfield this year, without a doubt. He'll average over 70% CBAs this year, that's certain. Do you know what he averaged last year in games where he had over 70% CBAs? 133. Now, I'm not saying that that's what he's going to average, but it gives us an idea of what he's capable of this season after another full preseason and natural improvement coming into his 3rd year. So I'm backing him in to get off to a strong start, and I expect his price to rise by the time his buy comes around in round 5. So moving on to Sicily, his last 4 seasons, he's averaged 94, 103, 113, and 114. And I think that trend will continue to go up this year. He also had scores last year of 166, 171, and 172. Hayden Young. Now, 100% confirmed he's playing full-time mid. Priced at an average of 94, he'll definitely average over 70% CBAs this year. I'm pretty confident of that. In his last 4 games last year, where he played full-time mid and averaged over 70% CBAs, he averaged 116 in those 4 games. Heath Chapman, now he's expected to play on the wing and a little halfback. Now he's priced at an average of 45, which I think is a great price for him and what he could potentially do. He played 17 games in 2022 where he averaged 76, which included scores of 101, 118, and 136. If he can average 70 or higher, I would take that. However, in 2022, he played mostly in defense, and this year he's playing mostly on the wing. Now, even though players generally score less on a wing compared to halfback, I think his improvement as a player will get his score high enough to make some good cash from him. So Zach Williams. With Williams, now he's priced at an average of 38 and averaged 77 in 2022. Now he's back into full training now, and we'll actually get to see how he looks in his role in round 0. Owned by 61% of the competition. So it looks like the majority of super coaches out there are pretty confident that we'll actually be able to earn some good cash from him, especially in those early rounds, and we'll be able to upgrade him from there. Now, Nick Hoffield, 57% owned, another popular pick. Rookie priced, hasn't played since 2021 when he averaged 63 from 16 games. Now, if he lines up in round one, I think he should be at the very least on your bench. Marty Hoare, surprised that he's only 28% owned. I'm actually deciding between Caulfield and Hoare for that D6 spot. I actually thought he would be owned by more teams than that. But the good thing with Marty Hoare is that we'll at least get a good look at Hoare's role, and for that matter, his job security if he lines up in round 0. He did average 70 in 2019. Toby Pink, he's just a placeholder for now. Even if he plays in round 1, he may not make that much cash anyway, seeing as he's a more of a key position defender. But again, just a placeholder for now. So moving on to my midfield, and I've got Rory Laird in there at M1. Now, with my midfield, with these 5 primos I've got in my midfield, I actually expect all of them to average around that 115 to 120 points this year. That's what I'm expecting from all 5 of them, which is why I've chosen them. And so with Laird, now he's priced at an average of 117. He's a full-time mid in the last 3 years of his career, and in that time he's averaged 116, 128, and 117 over those 3 years since he's been playing full-time mid. At the very least, he maintains his average this year, but I see a fair bit of upside. I also like that he's owned only by 10% of teams, and that's great for a premium mid like Laird. So Zach Butters, he's obviously seems to be a lot more popular, 32% owned. The last 3 years, he's averaged 80, 96, and 112 last year. It wasn't until round 4 last year that he started averaging over 60% CBAs, and then only after round 17 did that bump up over 70%, where he averaged 115 in those over 70% CBA games. And I think he will definitely average over 70% CBAs this year. So LDU, in his last 3 years, he's averaged 85, 101, and 113, which is what he's priced at this year. He averaged 126 in his last 6 games last year when he finally played without any niggles. And apparently, according to reports, he's entering the 2024 season fully fit. Caleb Sarong. Now, his first 4 years in the AFL, he's averaged 81, 83, 91, and 111. I love that trend. And I think that upward trend will undoubtedly continue. He's only owned by 11% of teams. I was hoping that his ownership would be lower and he'd be more of a pod, but I would still take Caleb Sarong at 11% ownership. Tom Green. His last 3 years, he's averaged 79, 97, and 111. He averaged 84% CBAs last year compared to 58% the year before. So based on that, I think that he will only get better. And like I said, with all these primos, I'm expecting them to average minimum 115 or around that 115 mark, hopefully pushing up to 120. So Caleb McKercher, the latest reports on McKercher is that he will be playing that halfback role. And I think he definitely will be playing round 1. There's no doubt about that. He played 7 games in the NAB League last year and averaged 115 AFL fantasy points. Now, he's owned by 63% of teams. I really think he should be owned by 100% of teams. Him and Harley Reid. The ownership should be a lot higher than what it is. Riley Sanders. Now, he's impressed everyone at Whitten Oval. When you hear all the talk and all the reports and the write-ups on Riley Sanders, everyone's quite impressed with him, and he should definitely line up in round one. Played 9 games in the NAB League last year, and he averaged 107 AFL fantasy points. I think he'll probably start off at half forward and have some stints in the midfield. Similarly to Sanders, Jeremy Sharp. The talk, everyone's talking him up. He's pretty much guaranteed that wing position at Freo now, being talked up quite a bit by many at the club. He averaged 91 AFL fantasy points from 19 games in the VFL last year, and he's rookie priced. If he lines up round one, he should be at the very least on your bench. Now, the other players I've got on my bench you can see are Clark and Stevens. I went through a little bit of info about them in my last video, but for me, they're more placeholders. I'll keep a lookout for them during the Matt Sims and the preseason games, and we'll see if they line up in round one. But Matt Roberts is a player I've added in recently, so only owned by 7%, which is good. Now, with Matt Roberts. Now, whilst I don't take too much notice of match sim reports, you take notice when a rookie price player is described as phenomenal by one of the coaches playing across halfback. And that's what happened with Matt Roberts. The good thing with Roberts is that we do get to see him if he lines up in round 0. Now, going to my rucks, Max Gawn. Priced at an average of 104, which is what he averaged during the regular season last year. He's averaged in the last 20 years. He's averaged in the 120s a few times in the past years. He averaged 160 without Grundy in the side last year, with scores of 174 and 215. In 2022, he averaged 113 during the regular season, but he also had Luke Jackson playing with him. Max is a beast when he rucks solo, which is what he will be doing all year this year. Despite his early buy in round 6, Max is still owned by 51% of the competition, and for good reason. Brodie Grundy, now he's averaged 130 twice in 2018 and 2019. Averaged 138 without Gawn in the side last year, and he's only priced at an average of 86. It makes perfect sense that he's owned by 67% of the competition. Now, I've also added Jordan Sweet on my bench. Now, he averaged 104 AFL fantasy points from 19 games in the VFL last year. I expect him to line up along with Soldo for Port in round 1. There's talk that only one of them will play. I think actually both of them may play. But whether Sweet gets that number 1 ruck mantle, I'm not sure. He was getting it when Soldo was just injured recently, but Soldo's back and it looks like in training he's playing that number 1 ruck position. But again, we just don't know. We'll just have to wait and see. Either way, if Sweet is lining up round 1, he should be a good cash cow and good cover for Gawn and Grundy when they have their buys in round 5 and 6. So with Sam Flanders, now he's owned by 37% of the competition. That's to be expected. I actually thought he might have even been owned by more than that, considering that there's not much option for premiums in the forward line. It looks like most teams are now going with a more cheaper forward line, I think, or a fairly thin forward line, and they're stacking up their defense mids and rucks. And it looks like everyone might be waiting for those DPP changes after round 6, and hopefully getting some mids that might get some forward status. But with Flanders, looks like he will play through the midfield again. He came back into the team in round 15 last year, and he averaged 106 in those last 10 games. Now he's priced at an average of 88. But what's interesting with Sam Flanders is that his role was a bit all over the place last year when he came back in those last 10 games. But he only averaged 38% CBAs in those last 10 games, but still scored well. And will likely continue that role this year, I'd say. It shows that he may not have started in the middle, but was rotated through the middle and he still scored well. I think he'll have more CBAs this year and more mid-time, which should result in better scores. Now with Taylor Adams, now he's only owned by 15% of the competition. Again, I thought he might be owned by more, and I guess maybe with Flanders and Adams, they do have the early buys, so I'd say probably a few coaches would be steering away from them because of the early buys. But for me, with Adams, the last 3 years, his CBAs have dropped from 77%, which he scored 100 or averaged 100 that year, when he had 77% CBAs, but then dropped to 65% CBAs the following year, and then 39% last year. And that makes sense because you had Degoe playing full-time mid, Dacos was playing more mid-time, and the Pies traded in Tom Mitchell as well. But Adams is a midfielder, and he wants more mid-time, and that was clearly the arrangement between him and John Longmire and Sydney before he was traded. Now, I think this year he'll get back to over 70% CBAs, and he's only priced at an average of 78. But the thing with Adams, the good thing there is because he plays for Sydney, because he has the early buy, we'll actually get a good look at his role in round 0. Now, Nat Fyfe is an interesting one of late. So he's gone up to 30% now ownership. He has averaged in the hundreds in the past when playing midfield, as recently as 2021. He averaged 85 when he got over 50% CBAs last year. Last year, in the 9 games that he played, he started sub twice and subbed off once and injured in another game. All that happened in the 9 games he played last year. But he's priced at an average of 50 or 51. That's quite low for him, because he's training purely in the midfield now this preseason, unlike the past couple of years where he's trained and played in the forward line, half forward. He has trained purely in the midfield. He's definitely a cash cow, not a keeper. So if he can average, say, 75 to 80 in the first 6 to 8 weeks, then that's a win. Of course, it is a gamble because of his age, injury history, and even potential low time on ground percentage as well. Look, it is a gamble, but it's a gamble that could really pay off, especially if he has no hiccups from now on and he hits round 1 fully fit. Now, James Harms, he recently said that he's trained all preseason as an inside mid. So he'll most likely play in that position with a little bit of a high half forward role as well. Now in 2021, he averaged 48% CBAs and averaged 86 points from 18 games that year. Similar to Fyfe, if he can average around 70 to 75 in the first 6 to 8 weeks, he'll be a really good cash cow. At this stage, it does look like he'll be part of that round 1 team. Harley Reid, I don't even really need to click on him and talk about him. Don't need to say anything about him. Actually, the only one thing I should say is that is too low. 75% ownership is too low. That should be 100% ownership for Harley Reid. So he will make some great cash for us. It'll be interesting to see how long we will hold on to him during the year. Many teams held on to Ashcroft last year for quite a while. Could be the same thing for Harley Reid and Sheasel for that matter last year as well. So Sean Manor, I've got in. I guess he's a bit of a placeholder. 50% ownership. That makes sense. 26-year-old forward. Averaged 110 AFL fantasy points from 21 games in the VFL last year. Expected to play round 1. So hopefully he does. I've got Darcy Jones in there as well. Only 1% ownership, so not many people agree with me. But like I said, he's just a placeholder. He may play round 1. He was picked 21 in the 2022 draft for GWS. He was injured all last year. He's been talked up a bit at GWS. And if he plays, then we'll get to see him in round 0. But yeah, like I said, for now, just a bit of a placeholder. And Sam Darcy. I've got 24% ownership. I've got him there on the bench as well. Should play round 1. The doggies are keen to get games in him. And we don't really know his position. He may play up forward with Stinson the ruck. But again, I guess just a placeholder for now. So I've made a few changes to my January team. I downgraded Jinby to Roberts and McRae to Fife. I wanted to strengthen other areas of my team and reduce the number of players that had the early buy. I actually still think Jinby will have a really good year and he'll actually make some good cash, but I needed the money from somewhere. And I thought moving Sharp onto my field to replace Jinby and bringing in Roberts on the bench, I think was maybe a good compromise, especially if Roberts gets that halfback role. Of course, this may all change when teams are named, etc., so we'll just have to wait and see. With McRae, I think he will go on to average that 95 to 100 mark, which is roughly what he's averaged last year, so I don't see a lot of upside. Plus, he's had these hamstring issues of late. That's not a serious thing. He'll be right for round 1. But trading him to 5, it just gave me a lot of cash, and it will benefit, especially if 5 can average that 75 to 80 mark in the first few weeks. Then, as I mentioned earlier, I'm really hoping that there'll be some good mids that will get forward status, and then I could upgrade 5 to one of these mids after round 6. So with the extra cash, I upgraded Oscar McDonald to Chapman, and I think Chapman will be a great cash cow this year. I upgraded Walsh and Miller to Laird and Butters. Now, I still think Walsh is a great value pick this year. He does have that early buy, and I think with Laird, I think Laird will average that 115 to 120 mark, and he doesn't have an early buy. And he's consistent and should be a good captain option as well. Miller, I'm a little concerned the improvement of Anderson, Rowell and Flanders may hamper Miller's score. I'll talk about Miller a little bit later because he is still a player I'm still considering. But I've upgraded Miller to Butters. It seemed to make sense because with Butters, I think he will average that 115 to 120 mark this year. He doesn't have the early buy, and he's got that good round 13 buy as well, that port share with Fremantle. I upgraded Maley. I had a Maley on my ruck bench. He's just that cheap 102k ruck from North. And I upgraded him to Sweet because I think Sweet will play round 1, and I think he will be a good backup when Gawn and Grundy have their early buys, and so he should make some early cash for us. I upgraded Wilson to Harms. Wilson will be a decent cash cow, but I think Harms has the job security and will score well. And lastly, I upgraded Archer Reed to Darcy Jones again, just a placeholder. It's good to have that 124k player on the bench. Gives me that flexibility to add any rookie on there that's worth 124k or cheaper. I still may bring in Walsh, and I may change Sweet if he doesn't line up round 1. So they're all still possibilities. So looking at the early buys at this stage, I've got Williams, and he'll be missing in round 2. I have Green and Flanders, who'll be missing in round 3. I've got Dacos, Grundy, and Adams missing in round 5, and I've just got Gawn missing in round 6. And there may be a rookie or 2 missing as well, potentially. But I'm actually pretty happy with that, and I'm happy with how it sits because I'll have these players that I want. I've wanted these players from the start, and I'll still have these players in my team after the early buys. Sam Walsh is probably that one, and maybe even Miller is the other player that I did have from the start that I really wanted. But I also really loved Laird and Butters as well. So I'm happy with that for now. But again, I am still considering other players. One of those players that I'm considering is Stewart, Tom Stewart. Now, that makes sense. I mean, he's 29% owned, so a very popular defender. He averaged 100, 107, 109, and 113 during the regular season in his last 4 years. Nice upward trend. He'll be 31 though when the season starts, but I still think that he has some improvement left in him. Now, there's talk of him playing in the midfield too. Last year, round 17, scored 124 when he had 26% CBAs. Round 19, scored 152 when he had 53% CBAs. So he's definitely one to consider. I do cover more players in my previous video, but these are the players that I'm seriously considering. The ones I'm going to go through from now on, they're the ones I'm more seriously considering, and that also includes Jack Sinclair. Now, he's priced at an average of 106. He averaged 113 2 years ago. Played a little bit more in the middle last year. He did average 119 in his last 6 games of the regular season last year, and he averages 116 when the Saints win. So if you're expecting the Saints to win more games this year, then Jack Sinclair could be a really good pick for you. With Nazaya Wanganeen-Milera, now he's priced at an average of 85, but in his last 14 games last year, he averaged 95 when he got more of a defensive and mid-roll, even pushing forward. So there's no doubt that there is value with Wanganeen-Milera. The other player that's been talked up a little bit recently, he's got 0%, but listening to 0% ownership, that is, but listening to some of the podcasts and watching some of the YouTube videos, I'm hearing him being talked up a little bit, but no one's picking him. He's priced at an average of 82. There may be some upside there, possibly. Apparently, he's having a great preseason, and with Hayden Young in the midfield, Clark may get more kickouts, and likely will play that halfback role that Hayden Young played as well last year. Harry Himmelberg, only owned by 2% of the competition, could be a really good pod as well. Priced at an average of 80, spent most of the first half of last year around the forward line. From round 13 last year, he played mostly in defense, where he averaged 91 from 14 games. He actually earlier this year said that this preseason will be his first full preseason down back, with the idea of playing a full season in defense. So that's going to really hold him in good stead. So another good pod could be Elliot Yeo. Now we're all a bit concerned with Yeo because of his injury history, but reports are saying that he's fully fit and having a good preseason and will play full-time mid this year. So he could be a really good stepping stone to a premium mid. A popular defender that people are picking is Kitty Coleman, 18% owned. And that's because he caught everyone's eye in the finals last year, where he scored 127 against Carlton and then 127 against Collingwood in the grand final. Now, he's priced at an average of 71. Now, he's not going to average 127 every game, but you'd expect him to average more than 71. He's also taking over from Daniel Rich, and the fact that Brisbane love getting the ball into his hands, he could be a good value pick. He played 13 games last year without Daniel Rich in the side and averaged 85. That's 12 points upside. But that included the 127-point games. So let's take those games out for a moment. Let's just say that they're an aberration and we'll take them out. He still would have averaged 78 points without Rich in the side. And remember, he did average 87 in 2022. So there's some definite upside there. Marcus Winhager, owned by 6% of the competition. He's entering his third year, averaged 48 and 58 in the last 2 years and priced at an average of 58. Expected to play in the midfield and maybe even half back. And if he does play in the midfield, he may play some run with roles or tagging roles potentially, but there could be some upside there at his price. A player that's actually garnering a bit of interest is Connor Budarick. Now, he's only owned by 3%, but he is being talked up a little bit. There's talk that he may be given that half-back role, similar to how Hardwick used Jaden Short. Now, Budarick has only played a handful of games in the AFL, but he's priced at an average of 54. And if he has a permanent role at half-back, then he'll have plenty of upside. Fortunately, we'll get to have a good look at him in round 0. So considering he averaged 77 in 2023, but priced at 54, again, could be really good value. So moving on to the midfield. Now, even though I'm not going to select Bont, he's owned by 31% of the competition. So a lot of super coaches out there feel that he's good value. He is a gun. I mean, he averaged just on nearly 130 last year. But for me, I won't be starting him at that price. I generally don't start players at top dollar. I can't see him going up and averaging beyond 130. So I think that his price will drop at some point, and that's when I'll be looking at bringing him in. Oliver was another player I was considering, even though he probably is nearly at top dollar. I mean, he's only owned by 1% of the competition, and that makes sense. He's had a rocky start to his preseason. But for me, I might wait till he's played a few games and then reassess. But, it's good to see that he's training with the main group now, or he's back at training with the other Melbourne players. So we'll see how he progresses over the rest of the preseason. So with what's happening with Oliver, Petrarca is one to have a look at. 22% owned, and that's about right, I would say. He's priced at an average of 119, and if Oliver doesn't play, Petrarca could be a great get. In the 10 games that Oliver missed last year, Petrarca averaged 124. So if Oliver doesn't line up round 1, Petrarca could be a really good option. As I mentioned earlier, Sam Walsh. 34% owned still, even though he's got that early buy. Same with Dacos. I think Dacos is owned by, where is he? Dacos. So he's owned by 61% of the competition. So these two players are owned by many coaches, are in many teams, even though they have early buys. And I think with these two players, I think they are worth starting with. He's priced at an average of 103, Sam Walsh. He averaged 122 in last year's finals, and by all reports, he's had a great preseason and he's fully fit. Probably the player I am most considering bringing into my team, or rather bringing back into my team. Having the round 3 bye is an issue, so look, I may end up waiting till he's had his bye. Because his bye is quite early, I might just wait till after his bye, see how he's gone in those first couple of games, and then reassess. Took Miller is the other one that I'm still considering. 25% owned, so that's a pretty decent ownership. He averaged 124 and 120 a couple of years ago, averaged 115 in his first 5 games last year, and then got a 40 in his injured game. So he's got some great history and recent history as well at that. Now, he wasn't the same though when he came back from his knee injury last year, hence the inconsistent scores that he had. But he's priced at 97. I'm still tempted to bring him back in, but as I said earlier, I'm just a little worried about the improvement of the other midfielders. But at least we'll get a good look at Miller in round 0. Again, I think the other thing to consider is how Hardwick's game plan may affect Miller. During the premiership years when Hardwick was coach at Richmond, they never had any big scorers. Dusty, with that 122 average in 2017 aside, Dusty's other years and other players, they only got around that 100-point average. So it'll be interesting to see how the Suns players will go this year, and for that matter, how Tooth Miller will go this year. The other player to consider, I think, is Jack Steele. Now, he averaged 126 only 2 to 3 years ago. His price at an average of 95 might be a good pick, especially considering he carried a number of injuries, I think, last year. He did have an ankle clean out not long ago, but he's resumed full-time training now and he looks fully fit. He is a consideration, but I probably would be looking at Walsh and Miller ahead of Steele. I think another player to consider is Nick Martin. Only 2% owned, so he's a good pod. He averaged 79 and 88 in his first 2 years in the AFL. And of course, that average of 88 is what he averaged last year. Definitely a third-year breakout candidate, especially with talk that the Bombers are planning to play him off halfback. I'd love to fit him in, but you just can't fit them all in, can you? Unfortunately. But these are all players I am still looking at and considering, and will be looking closely at over the preseason. Matt Crouch is another one. Only 6% owned, averaged 110 in 2017 and 110 in 2020. He's priced at an average of 88, and even though last year he averaged 97.6 it says, but he's priced at 88, and he averaged 108 in his last 6 games when he came back into the team and played in the midfield. We'll have to keep a lookout for his role in the team and his job security, but if those things check out, he's definitely a value pick. Another player coaches are considering is Carl Amon, only 3% owned, so at this stage another good pod. Priced at an average of 86, averaged 117 from rounds 18 to 23 last year, although he didn't play in round 20. He played across half-back in most of those games when he averaged 117, and there's talk that he may play there permanently this year, so another player to keep a close eye on. Jason Horne-Francis, so owned by 4% of the competition. Again, another pod. Averaged 63 in his first year and 77 last year. He's fully fit, another full preseason. Priced at 77, I actually could see him averaging anywhere between 90 and 100 this year. So if he averages that, that's minimum 13-point upside. So he could be a good mid-pricer for you. In addition to that is Cam Guthrie. Now he's 8% owned, so there's actually a few coaches onto him. Averaged 103 in 2020, then 113 and 109. Didn't really start too well last year, but he is priced at an average of 75, although he averaged 83 last year. He will be the Cats' prime midfielder, and he will start the season at 31 years of age. So even though that is the case, he still might be really good value. Now going to the Rucks, Tim English. Now, he's owned by 10% of the competition, and that's likely because everybody is going the Gaundy combination, Gawn and Grundy. But 10% is still a decent ownership, especially considering that, he's had these health issues. He's only just back into full contact training after suffering, those migraine-related symptoms. We know he's a gun. All the stats from last year just scream out how much of a gun he is. He averaged 128 last year. He scored 88, 90, and 99 last year, and every other score was above 100. It included scores of 143, 145, 156, 163, and 173. Just amazing. But in my opinion, I actually think Gawn could probably could give us that kind of output this year. So I'm going for Gawn over English. What we're looking at about $120,000 difference. I think Gawn would be the better value ruck there. But with English, with his interrupted preseason, not too sure how well he'll start the year, considering what we have to fork out to get him. He's worth $715,000. But with players like Bont and English, like guns, absolute guns, you don't want to underestimate them as well. So there's a few things to consider there. Sean Darcy, I will only consider if Luke Jackson is out for a few weeks, because Sean Darcy goes off when Jackson is not in the side. 1% owned, an average of 105, 106. So yeah, like I said, only if Luke Jackson is out. Now, Tristan Sherry is an interesting one, but I want to digress slightly. I was supposed to load up a video here, but you can just YouTube it yourself. But Tristan Sherry, I'm hearing a lot of people and even commentators pronouncing his name as Cherry, CH, with a CH sound. It's actually pronounced Sherry with an SH sound. Now, North Melbourne put up a video of when he was drafted in 2017, where he was interviewed and he was asked how to pronounce his name, and he pronounced it as Sherry. You can look that up on YouTube as well. But anyway, I just wanted to digress slightly. It was a bit of an annoying bugbear thing with me, but anyway, yeah, digressing a bit there. But let's get back to it. So Sherry will be rucking solo this year with Goldstein moving to Essendon. He's priced at an average of 73, and he scored 102 and 75 in the 2 games last year that Goldstein wasn't playing. So he could be a value pick. Unfortunately, we only have a small sample size, just with those 2 games without Goldstein. Moving to the forward line, and starting with McRae, who I did initially have in my team. He's 40% owned, and that just makes sense because he's probably the only real premium and consistent premium in that forward line. He will likely finish a top 6 forward by the end of the year. He's priced at 100 and should finish, I think, with that 95 to 100 average for the year. So not a great deal of upside. But having said that, Bailey Smith averaged 30% CBAs last year. So does that do those CBAs get passed on to McRae, or does it go to Riley Sanders, or does it go to both of them, or does it go to other midfielders? I'm not really too sure. Luke Jackson, similar to Sean Darcy. If Darcy is out, you jump on Luke Jackson. In the 8 games that Jackson played without Darcy last year, he averaged 118, which included a score of 173. Now, if you've got Tom Lynch in your side, now he's owned by 12% of the competition, so people were wanting to jump on him for value. He's averaged in the 80s and I think 90s as well in the past. But if you've got Lynch in your side, you may have to think twice, with Richmond now ruling him out of the round 0 game. They're saying that he could play round 1. Lynch is even saying he may only be able to come back in round 2. But you got to ask yourself, do you want to bring in a player that's been in rehab for most of the preseason? It might be best to wait till he's played, his 2 games before his price rises, and then, reassess, before you bring him in. But and now that we've got these 40 trades to play with, we can actually make these kinds of calls where we can maybe wait on a player and then just bring him in if we feel like he's good value. The other player in that same bracket for value is James Jordan, so owned by 22% of the competition, which is quite high. It appears that teams are really going with these value players and mid-price players in the forward line, because James Jordan has that early buy. It's the same reason why everyone's scared off Dacos and Adams and so forth, but with James Jordan having the early buy as well. But really, it looks like coaches are picking these players because they see the value and it's worth starting with them. Now, apparently with James Jordan, he's being lined up for a position on the wing to high half forward with stints as an inside mid. He's priced at an average of 49 there. There's definitely upside, and we'll get a good look at him and his role in round 0 if he plays, which he likely will. There's not much else in the forward line, really. Again, we'll get a good look at the upcoming club match sims and the preseason games, and then we can reassess after that. So thanks again, everyone, for watching and for listening, and I'll catch you soon and see you in the next video.